He carried the elephant calf on his back. What happens next was unbelievable. Kafue Flats, midday. A pale haze hangs over the open grasslands, the air dry and still. At the edge of a shallow, cracked waterhole, a young elephant calf lies curled in the dust. His front legs fold beneath him. His back legs are stretched behind at an unnatural angle, unmoving. His ears twitch once, then settle again. The mud on his side is flaking off in patches, brittle under the sun. The waterhole, once fed by seasonal rains, is nothing more than a warm puddle now. Silent, retreating. No other elephants are nearby. No tracks lead in. No trumpets call out. Just the sound of insects and the slow breath of something very young and very alone. Ranger Doughty had been walking the west boundary of Sector 3 when he saw it. From a distance, he thought it might have been a fallen log or collapsed antelope, but as he came closer, he saw the sway of one ear, the breathing, the eyes, half closed, sunken. He stopped 20 meters away and crouched slowly. The calf didn't move. No attempt to rise, no sign of alertness. Doughty kept still, observing. The spine looked curved. A tremor ran through the calf's side, then stopped. He raised his radio to his mouth and pressed the call button with 2 fingers. The report was brief. Young elephant, alone, hindquarters likely compromised, no herd nearby. Breathing shallow, he gave coordinates, then lowered the radio. He did not step closer. He did not speak. Instead, he scanned the horizon for signs, dust trails, shadow movement, silhouettes across the flats. Nothing. 10 minutes passed before the calf stirred again. Not a rise, only a slight shift of his front right leg. His trunk dragged the ground and coiled back against his chin. His tail was still. Flies moved along the crease between his ribs and belly. Doughty adjusted his stance and removed a small flask from his belt, taking only a sip. The calf watched him now, barely. Just the whites of his eyes shifting, then settling again. A small exhale pushed dust from the soil. His back legs remained stiff. There was no blood, no wounds visible, but something inside had failed. Bone, nerve, something. If the herd had abandoned him, it likely wasn't by choice. A calf this young wouldn't survive alone for more than 36 hours without water or shade. If they were nearby, they would have come by now. If he tried to move, he might worsen whatever damage already existed. But if he stayed here through the night, exposed, alone, and motionless, he would not survive the predators that passed through after dark. An hour later, Doughty took 3 slow steps forward and lowered a shallow canvas water tray near the calf, careful not to make sudden sounds. He poured from a flask and waited. The calf shifted again, this time with effort. His trunk reached, missed, then touched the edge. He drank slowly without lifting his head. The water darkened the dust beneath his chin. Then he stopped. Doughty backed away again. Behind him, the wind rose once and carried a sheet of dust eastward. No calls, no hooves, just stillness. One ranger, one calf, one shallow breath at a time. Far above them, a single bird circled in silence. By late afternoon, the sky paled behind drifting haze, and the sound of an engine broke the quiet. A veterinary vehicle approached from the north, its tires crunching the brittle earth. 2 field vets stepped down without words. They carried no crates, no stretchers, just a thermal pack, water reserves, and sedation tools. The calf lifted his head slightly at the vibration but made no sound. His rear legs remained fixed, stretched unnaturally behind him like forgotten limbs. His belly pressed into the cracked surface of the dry pan, ribs lifting with each breath, each one slower than the last. Doughty met them halfway and spoke quietly. 2 hours. Minimal movement. No other signs. The senior vet, Dr. Muriuki, nodded and approached at an angle, stopping 10 paces from the calf. The younger vet, Nia, circled wide. They observed first posture, breath rhythm, muscle twitch. No trauma visible. No bleeding, but something in the way the calf's spine curved as he shifted suggested compression, nerve damage, possibly fractured vertebrae. The prognosis was unclear, but not good. They administered saline through a portable line, sliding the needle gently into a vein along the inner leg. The calf shivered slightly. His eyes opened wider, though the lids remained heavy. Flies lifted, then returned. The sun dipped low behind the tall reed beds in the west. Time passed quietly, with only the distant buzz of wind and the soft beeping of the drip counter. Twice they paused to scan the surrounding flats for any sign of movement. Ears above grass, silhouettes in the heat. But the land remained still. Herds usually returned within hours if a calf had been left by mistake, but now it has been nearly 7. No trumpeting, no dust trails. Just wind moving dry seed pods across the soil. Nia knelt beside the calf and checked the pulse again. Faint, but present. His skin was sun-warmed and dry, but not burning. That meant his body still regulated heat, barely. If they moved him now, they risked further damage. If they left him overnight, exposed and without herd protection, the risk of predation would increase. The choice was not between comfort and discomfort. It was between two kinds of survival. One fast and aggressive, the other slow and dangerous. Dr. Murayuki stood quietly for a long moment, eyes on the calf's back legs. Then he looked at Dowdy. "We wait," he said softly. "We hydrate. We hold the night here." Dowdy nodded. They began setting up a low tent canopy. Not above the calf, but near enough to shield some of the ground from the wind. A thermal mat was placed near his side, just under the curve of his ribs. He barely reacted as the cloth touched his skin. His trunk twitched once, curling toward his mouth, then fell still. By dusk, the wind picked up. It carried dust in long spirals across the flats. The waterhole had hardened to a bowl of fractured clay. The vet team sat a few meters away, watching, resting, waiting for any sound, from the calf or the land beyond. If he tried to rise now, he would collapse. If they sedated him too deeply, his lungs might fail. If the herd did not come by morning, the decision would shift again. But for now, they stayed. One night, one chance. If they waited, he might survive. If not, he would die here, quietly in the stillness of his own eyes. By first light, the wind had dropped. The plains were quiet again, as if holding their breath. The calf lay just as they'd left him, head turned slightly toward the sunrise, ears limp, spine bowed. The saline bag had emptied sometime in the night. His eyes remained open, but they did not follow movement. Nia approached and gently touched his side. He blinked once. That was enough. He was still there. The team gathered beside the parked vehicle. The terrain ahead, a mix of salt pans and floodplain marsh, had worsened overnight. The wind had hardened the surface just enough to mislead. One false turn and the wheels would sink. They'd already lost one half-loaded crate the year before to the same stretch of land. Carrying him out on a stretcher was also ruled out. He was over 200 kilograms now. Underweight, yes, but still far too heavy for 4 people to lift across kilometers of uneven earth. Dr. Murayuki suggested airlifting, but after examining the calf's back, he shook his head. The harness would press against the lumbar, possibly fracture it further. There were no safe ways left, just options with consequences. Dowdy crouched beside the calf. His own back ached from the cold ground and long vigil, but his mind had settled. He studied the distance between them and the old firebreak road, just over 3 kilometers. If they could reach that track, another vehicle could meet them. But the path was narrow, broken, crisscrossed by small thorn scrub and dry river furrows. Still, it was the only line left to draw. Without ceremony, Dowdy pulled the harness from the medical kit. Not the rescue sling, too thick, just a simple wide strap. He folded it twice, then slipped it gently under the calf's chest, adjusting each side until the bulk rested evenly. The calf shifted slightly, the trunk brushing the dust. His ears gave one slow flick. Nia helped secure the strap around Dowdy's shoulders and across his hips. It took time. They adjusted for weight, balance, strain on the spine. Dowdy said nothing. At last, he rocked back, bracing his legs in the dirt, and lifted, first to a crouch, then standing. The calf didn't cry out. He barely moved. His trunk lay curled against Dowdy's chest. His legs hung loose behind. The first steps were the hardest. Dust shifted beneath their boots. The sun was already rising, soft but growing sharper. Nia walked a few paces behind, carrying water and watching for signs of distress from either of them. Dr. Maruki stayed with the vehicle, documenting coordinates, preparing the second team to intercept. Every 10 minutes, Dowdy paused beneath a patch of brush or beside a mound. He would lower himself gently until the calf rested on the mat again. Not long, just enough for breath. Then he lifted again. By the second hour, they'd crossed half the distance. The calf stirred once, a faint twitch in the trunk, a soft sigh against Dowdy's shoulder. It wasn't strength returning, but something else, something quieter. Recognition, perhaps, or surrender. The firebreak road came into view in pieces, first as a pale curve beyond a low rise, then as the straight cut of an old track where grass grew in the center. The vehicle was waiting. Shadows stretched long across the land now, and the air thickened with heat. Dowdy lowered himself for the final time as the second team came to assist. His shirt clung to him, soaked through. His knees shook. The calf's breathing was shallow but steady. He did not stand, but he had not broken. Not yet. What was at risk remained the same. If they moved him wrong now, they could undo everything. But if they left him behind again, even for a moment, he would not survive another night. They lifted together, slow and quiet. No words, no rush, just one life, carried one step at a time. The road from the firebreak to the ranger outpost was only 4 kilometers, but it climbed steadily through dry hills etched by wind and time. The rescue vehicle could go no farther, blocked by a washed-out culvert and a narrow bend laced with thorn acacia. What remained would have to be crossed on foot again. The ground was harder here, but angled, the kind of ascent that wore the hips and pressed the lungs, and Dowdy had already carried more than any man should. They secured the calf in the harness again, adjusting for weight, stabilizing the spine. The vets offered to alternate carrying, but Dowdy shook his head once. The calf had grown used to his breathing, his step. A new rhythm might cause distress, and distress now meant danger. So they wrapped the straps across his chest again, locked the sling, and Dowdy lifted. Slowly, with knees bent, back straight, jaw clenched. The calf rested limp against his spine, the trunk brushing softly down his shoulder. The heat gathered fast by mid-morning. Clouds stayed high and thin, offering no cover. Each hill rose in a long slope that gave the illusion of leveling, then climbed again. Dust hung in the air even when the wind was still. They stopped often, not by plan, but by necessity. Dowdy would kneel gently near the widest patch of shade, where thorn scrub cast angled relief across the ground. There they'd lower the calf, pour a few drops of water along his lips, rest, and lift again. Each time they moved, the calf gave a faint sound. Not a cry, not fear, just a soft exhale through the trunk. Sometimes a twitch of the ear, a flinch in the front leg. These signs meant his nerves still spoke. They were weak, but they were not silent. The group moved together in a quiet rhythm. Nia led, clearing small obstacles. One ranger followed behind with a canvas roll and spare flask. No one rushed. Every motion was intentional. Every pause planned around breath, not time. By the 5th hour, Doughty's hands were raw beneath the straps. Dust coated his arms, dried at the corners of his mouth. His knees buckled once, just briefly, and the team steadied him without a word. He stood again. Carried again. They passed the last ridge slowly, where the land opened into a small basin ringed by mopane trees. The outpost sat at the far edge. One fence, one water tank, one shaded corral built for temporary holding. As the sun dropped low on the horizon, the shadows grew long and soft. Doughty reached the fence line just as his legs gave way. He knelt into the dust and stayed there. The calf rested against his back until the others came to lift him, cradle him, ease him to the mat inside the holding yard. There was no sound from the calf now, but he breathed. The slow rise of his ribs said enough. He was alive. His body had not failed during the climb. His spine had not fractured further, but he was far from safe. The outpost's night team stepped into place. Dr. Murayuki arrived an hour later. He checked the calf's reflexes, reinserted hydration, applied gentle compresses to the rear joints. He didn't speak much, just one line. He has hours. If his swelling holds, he may have days. Doughty sat just beyond the fence, head bowed, dirt drying on his face. Behind him, the hills glowed under a pale orange sky. The dust no longer moved. The day had carried them both, barely but fully, home. By the first morning at the outpost, the calf had not moved. They placed soaked leaves and a shallow basin of mashed fruits near his mouth. He turned his head away. His trunk remained limp across the dust. The swelling in his lower spine had reduced slightly, enough to allow minimal touch without reaction, but his body language stayed the same. Stillness, tight limbs, shallow breath. Dr. Murayuki checked him twice daily, rotating the pressure points along his legs and hips to prevent injury. Nia brought water laced with glucose and spoon-fed drops into the curve of his trunk. Each time, the calf closed his eyes. Not resistance, just fatigue. Doughty never left the enclosure. At night, he lay on the bare soil a few feet away, his back pressed to the fence. The others offered him bedding, but he declined. He listened to the calf's breath in the dark, sometimes uneven, sometimes quiet enough to question. The calf never cried out, but he also never ate. By the second evening, they considered sedation again. A gentle dose, just enough to relax the muscles and stimulate reflexes. But Dr. Murayuki hesitated. A sedated calf might miss a critical cue from a herd, even a distant trumpet. Sometimes survival was less about intervention and more about listening for the right sound. Beyond the outpost, across a stretch of managed land, there was a rehabilitation sanctuary with a small herd of orphaned juveniles. Among them, an older female, nearly grown, named Malkia. She'd been rescued 5 years earlier from a collapsed ravine. She was known to vocalize at night, sometimes to no one in particular, sometimes to the moon. The third night came with wind. Warm, steady wind from the east. Doughty sat cross-legged beside the calf, humming softly under his breath. Not a song, just breath and tone. Above them, the clouds moved fast, thin against the stars. Then, near midnight, from the direction of the sanctuary, a trumpet broke the air, soft, drawn out. It rolled across the flats like a distant horn. Then silence. 30 seconds later, another came. Then a third, short and clipped. The kind of call made by a female to a calf who has wandered too far. Doughty sat upright. The calf stirred. First, his ear twitched. Then his trunk lifted an inch. It hovered midair, turned slowly toward the sound, then dropped again. But his eyes were open now. Focused. Not glazed. Doughty stood and stepped back slowly. He said nothing, just watched. The calf shifted his front legs. They moved only slightly, but with intention. He did not try to rise. He did not cry out. But something had returned to the way he lay, a subtle tilt of the head, a searching in the eyes. By morning, they found a trail of trunk marks in the dust, faint arcs drawn toward the fence's edge. The basin of mashed fruit had been disturbed. Not eaten, not fully, but touched. Enough to say this: he was no longer alone in the world. He had heard something that made him want to stay. They did not sedate him. They did not move him. They waited. And the next night they opened the outer gate. Just once. Just enough for the wind to carry the scent of another life his way. At sunrise, the decision was made. Malkia would be allowed through the corridor fence that connected the sanctuary to the outpost's outer pen. She had paced its edge for hours the night before, ears lifted, trunk raised often toward the wind. She'd shown no aggression, only long pauses near the boundary and an occasional low rumble from deep within her chest. It wasn't dominance. It was an inquiry. Dr. Murayuki signed off quietly. The calf's vitals had held steady overnight. His trunk had twitched repeatedly in sleep. The small basin had been disturbed again. Not much missing, but something. The others prepared the corridor, cleared the narrow path, secured both gates, ensured the calf was stable. Doughty stood just beyond the inner pen, arms loose at his sides. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The risk was clear. Malkia was nearly full-grown. One misstep, one startled motion, could end what fragile progress had been made. But without this, without contact, the calf would likely waste away in stillness. At midday, the outer gate unlatched. Malkia stepped forward slowly. Her ears fanned outward once, then folded slightly back. She walked with long, patient steps, her feet falling soft against the packed soil. No trumpet, no snort, just a hum, low, steady, that vibrated through the fence rails. The calf did not rise, but his eyes followed her. She reached the edge of the enclosure and paused. 10 feet, then 8, then 5. The calf did not move. His front legs remained tucked. His spine curved gently where the swelling had receded. His trunk lifted once, wavered, and dropped. Malkia stood beside him. She didn't sniff or nudge. She didn't test the air. She simply waited. Then, after a long stillness, she lowered her trunk and let it rest, lightly, across the middle of his back. The calf blinked. His breath caught and shivered. Then, with a slow shift of weight, he leaned. Not far, just enough that his shoulder touched her front leg. No panic, no distress. He closed his eyes. Doughty turned away briefly, kneeling near the outer gate. The rest of the team remained outside, watching through the rails. Malkia stayed by the calf until the light shifted orange across the yard. She didn't lie down. She didn't call. She just remained, her shadow falling over his body like a cover. That evening, a fresh basin of soaked leaves was placed near the calf's mouth. Malkia stepped aside once, allowing him space. The calf turned his trunk slowly, not rushed, not uncertain. He reached into the basin, curled the tip, and brought it to his lips. He ate. Only a few leaves, a slow chew. But it was the first nourishment he'd accepted since the rescue. And it wasn't coaxed, it wasn't forced. It was chosen, made possible not by medicine or transport or hydration, but by the presence of another. When the sun dipped below the horizon, Malkia stepped back. She didn't return to the corridor immediately. She paused, watching the calf, then turned to the fence line and waited for the gate to reopen. Doughty exhaled for the first time in hours. He watched her step through the boundary, then disappear down the corridor path, dust rising in her wake. Behind him, the calf slept, fed, leaning into the earth with one side of his body warmer than the other, the side that had been touched. By the fourth morning, the calf stood. It was not sudden, no miraculous rise, just a long, uncertain shift in weight until his front legs straightened and his back legs dragged forward inch by inch. The swelling around his spine had eased, allowing motion without collapse. Malkia stood nearby, not touching, not guiding, simply present. She turned her head slightly, gave a low hum, and resumed walking along the fence. The calf followed, slow and shaky, his steps uneven but deliberate. His back right leg trailed at a dull angle, but it moved. Each lap of the yard brought him closer to balance. He stumbled twice and stopped often. His trunk swept low, brushing the ground, gathering information in particles of dust and scent. He paused when Malkia paused. When she turned, so did he. She did not look back. She did not wait. But she adjusted her pace so he could follow. Doughty watched from the far edge of the yard. He no longer entered. His role had shifted. The days of lifting and carrying were over. What came now could not be assisted, only witnessed. He kept records in a small logbook: mobility, appetite, responsiveness. But he wrote without urgency. The data wasn't what mattered. The calf's choice was. On the 6th lap, the calf stopped and looked over his shoulder. His trunk lifted slightly in Doughty's direction. Not a call, not a question. Just a moment held between two lives who had once moved as one. Then he turned again and resumed walking, always behind her. That afternoon, Malkia was allowed into the larger corridor that stretched toward the sanctuary trail. The gate at the far end remained closed, but the space between gave them room. Doughty opened the pen himself and stepped back. Malkia moved first, walking in her long, measured rhythm. The calf hesitated only once before stepping across the line. His hooves caught briefly on the uneven ground, then found their place in hers. For the first time since his collapse at the waterhole, the calf moved without touch. He moved not because a rope pulled him or a man carried him, but because something ahead was worth following. The path curved slightly through low brush and golden grass. Malkia led, her ears catching the light. The calf followed, dragging one leg behind. But straighter now, more sure. His breath was faster, his body as lean, but his will was evident, and it was no longer about surviving. It was about belonging. At the end of the corridor, Malkia stopped. The gate remained closed, but her body stood aligned with it. She gave one short rumble, barely audible. Then she turned sideways, allowing the calf to come beside her, not behind. They stood together. His trunk brushed her side once, softly. Doughty wrote a final line in his book and closed it. The last entry read, "He walks on his own. Still injured, still weak, but he chooses her." Nothing else needed to be said. In the quiet space between two gates, a path had been chosen, not by instinct or force, but by quiet trust. The calf had found the herd, and this time he was not left behind. 2 months passed. The rains came late that year, brushing only the southern edge of the Kafue Flats. Dust still ruled the air most mornings, lifting in soft spirals over the open pans. Tracks faded quickly, waterholes stayed shallow, but movement returned. Slow, scattered, quiet. Herds that had drifted away during the dry weeks began to appear again along the lower banks, close to the reed beds. One morning, near the old Firebreak Road, Doughty stood with his field scope, noting hoof patterns at the edge of a clearing. It was routine, just confirming movements, counting numbers, checking for known injuries. At first, he saw only shadows against the glare. 5, maybe 6 elephants grazing mid-distance. Then more emerged. A total of 9. Not large, but structured. Young bulls, 2 juveniles, and a pair at the center who moved in near-perfect rhythm. One was tall and firm in step. The other was smaller, still leaning slightly to one side, but walking with purpose. The smaller one carried a single white mark, a streak of scar tissue that ran down the length of his spine, faint but unmistakable. Sunlight caught it like a thread of salt through soil. Doughty adjusted the lens. It was him. The calf, though no longer quite a calf, had grown into his frame. He walked straighter now. His limp remained, but it no longer dragged behind him. His ears flicked with alertness. His trunk moved freely. Each step looked placed with intention. Beside him walked Malkia, taller, wiser, her body always angled slightly toward his, never leading, never pushing. They moved like rivers and stones, shaped by one another, inseparable now. He watched as the pair paused near a line of acacia. The younger one reached for a branch, tugged it loose, chewed slowly. Malkia waited, then turned gently and continued east. The calf followed. There was no bandage now, no sling, no fence, just dust rising underfoot, soft and unhurried. Another ranger joined Dowdy and asked, "Is that him?" Dowdy nodded. "It's him." They didn't approach. There was no reason. The herd was whole. No sign of distress. No cause for human presence. They watched until the elephants vanished behind the next rise, their shapes swallowed by heat, shimmer, and dust. The mark on the calf's spine was the last to disappear, a pale reminder of what had once needed carrying. Dowdy made no notes that day. He packed the scope, adjusted the strap over his shoulder, and began the walk back along the ridge. Behind him, the flats stretched wide and open, silent, except for the breeze moving gently across the plain, a quiet witness to the fact that some things do not end where they fall. They are lifted, they are carried, and, if given time, they learn to walk again. From far off, a faint trumpet echoed. Then nothing, only the dust, still rising.